The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. Jim Harold's Campfire is also brought to you by My Patriot Supply. Get their 4-week survival food supply for only $99. Ready for survival when you need it. Call 888-440-7839 or go online at preparewithjim.com. Thanks, My Patriot Supply.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold, and so glad to be with you once again. And we have a great show for you. In fact, we have 3 guests today, and I think that you'll really enjoy it. Our first 2 guests, actually in separate interviews, are Daniel Jones and Lloyd Auerbach. They're going to be talking about something called the Church of Jediism. And what in the world is the Church of Jediism? Well, today we're going to find out. And then we're joined by a very nice man and very erudite and scholarly man about the subject of ancient mysteries. Laird Scranton will join us to talk about the mystery of Skara Brae. And that is the Paranormal Podcast this week. I think you're going to enjoy it, and here it is. Well, today we have something very different. When I heard about this originally from Lloyd Auerbach, who has been on programs many times, I thought we need to do a show on this. So today we're going to talk about the Church of Jediism. And first we're going to talk to the founder, Daniel M. Jones, about it. And then later on, Lloyd will join us in a separate interview talking about it briefly. And really interested in this. So I will pose the question to Daniel, who's on the line with us today, and he is the founder of the Church of Jediism. Daniel, how did this all start?
Hey, Jim. Nice to be on the show. And so how it started is kind of, I wouldn't say it's like bizarre, but it's got a really interesting story. Well, I find it interesting anyway, because I was always... so I grew up in a household which is completely neutral of religion, but my father is a fifth dan black belt in karate, which means he has 5 black belts, and he also invented his own style of karate, taken from the original Japanese style. So I grew up in a household that had a lot of kind of Japanese, philosophy in it, and then obviously I grew up in the schools I went to were all Christian-based schools, but I was never secular, but growing up I had this kind of like thirst for kind of trying to figure out, what the universe is made up of. And I also have Asperger's syndrome, so that makes me kind of analyze everything very detailed. And so to cut a long story short, the census phenomena that happened in 2001, where a lot of people put Jedi down as their religion, it sparked an interest in me. And I thought, well, there's obviously something there, besides the joking aside, that there's a big community of people there who must, realize the potential for something. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could organize it and find a way of getting all these people together and doing something good in the world? So that is how the Church of Jediism kind of started. Back in 2007 was when I actually formulated a website and went to put it out there on the web and see if anybody would buy it and was interested. And it worked pretty well because we had an overwhelming response to it. And it's been growing ever since, and it was fascinating, really. And a lot of people say, so what made me do it? And I guess what made me do it was the fact that it needed to be done. I feel like, I sat down and I thought, somebody needs to do this, because people are disconnected from spirituality, and I feel like humans have spent a lot of time drifting away from spirituality, and I don't mean spirituality as in like spiritualism. I mean feeling a connection to a higher force and feeling that connection to the universe and each other as well. I mean, I'm not talking about a dogmatic connection. It's connection with other people, a systematic connection, and I think that's been lost in years, and I think it's a sad thing, because when we're more connected, we're closer. When we're closer, we're stronger, and when we're stronger, we prosper much more, and success is greater. So that's what made me do it, really.
And what are the central tenets of the Church of Jediism? Basically, what does this encapsulate?
It's okay. So there's no like overly strict rulings. So I have to make that perfectly clear. There's, we're not gonna, it's not like some people say, they frown upon, same-sex marriages and stuff. Nothing like that. There's nothing crazy in it. But we promote living a lifestyle where you kind of let me try and explain it. So it's an applied life philosophy using applied living techniques, and those techniques help you adjust your life to reach greater potential. So where you may have been spiraling down in some way into an oppressive state, we try and unravel that and get people back on track to where they really are. So they're a fully operating human. So they can, they feel that they breathe that intuition that they've always had. They talk to that secular side of them where they connect to a higher power, or they feel that they're connected to a higher power, and they go out and they be with nature. They're never cruel to people. You don't hurt and kill animals. You always try your best for people. You try and encourage happiness and peace wherever you can. It's your duty to be the mediator for getting peace across, and always doing your best. And I think it's all about lifestyle as well. So we encourage people to live a certain type of lifestyle, like trying to understand what's healthy and what's unhealthy. And when you apply these conditions to your life, it becomes more. It's kind of like, I don't know, like opening your eyes a bit. You go, oh, okay, I get it now. That I have this connection with people. I have this connection with the universe. I'm able to move reality in my direction, because we are the creations of our own imagination, and it's getting that principle to people in a non-secular way, from relatability, which is kind of like, obviously that's what Jediism comes from, that term from Star Wars, because it's relatable, because the Jedi in the Star Wars are the peacekeepers of the galaxy, and they have all these tenets within their creed, really, and that's where it comes from.
Now, using the phrase church, that probably was intentional, but I assume it's not a choice without controversy. You probably have some people who are, maybe, let's say someone's an atheist. They say, well, I don't want to belong to any kind of church. Or maybe you have someone who is a devout Christian, for example, and say, well, I'm not giving up my church for this Church of Jediism. Can you talk about the choice of the phrase, the Church of Jediism, and what it means, how it may be misunderstood, possibly?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so I'm going to cover both parts. You actually asked two different questions there, probably without realizing, but I'll cover both of them. And the first one I'll cover was the latter one, where you asked, what if a Christian says, oh, I don't want to leave this church to join the Church of Jediism, and nobody has to do that. The idea of the Church of Jediism is, because it's non-dogmatic and non-secular, you can, because it's an applied life philosophy at the end of the day. So you have the choice whether, if you're searching for a religious belief system that you want to apply to your life and say, this is what I align myself with, it can therefore become your religion, and it can be your church of worship and your belief system. But if you already are a Muslim or a Christian or a Buddhist or any other religious member of another community, it's kind of like a supercharging, like a bolt-on to those belief systems. So we don't infringe on any of those belief systems. We don't tell you to believe in any false gods, if you will, or any dogmatic hierarchy. There's nothing like that. So it's very adaptable. So that's one thing I need to get across. So we have people of multi-faith cultures coming through and being part of our community. Now, to answer the first question, and it's the last question I'll answer on it, is you asked why we're using the word church and where does the term come from, and what was the idea about using that. So the idea comes from the fact that church was first used, or the term church was first used as a word to describe a meeting place or gathering of people in the house of God. And this slowly diminished to being just meeting place or congregation of people. And when you have a congregation of people who have like-minded ideologies and idiosyncrasies, this is still a church. The controversy that surrounds it is because, yes, using an older word to you rather than saying like, the group of humanist behavior along Jediism traits, instead of using something more modern, we've gone for a more traditional idea of calling it the Church of Jediism. And the reason I do that, and I say this with great pride, is because we live in a society where we see things religiously, and this is one of the issues. We see it as kind of like, very old and damp and old buildings and, old books and very backward. When you say about religion or belief or spirituality or philosophy, people think about these kind of old ways of thinking about it. So what I thought what we should do is bring back, why should we be excluded from using the term church? It's like I said to you, now it's a term to mean congregation of people, dictionarily. So there's no reason why we can't use it. And one of the good things is, if we can use that and use it in a positive way that allows people to use the word and the term freely without being stuck to a dogmatic sense or any secular sense, then we're doing something pretty good. And I believe that's a good thing to do. And again, it's rationalizing and modernizing older words and bringing them back to use in public domain. And so that's one of many things we do to try and kind of move society along and move it forward.
What do the Star Wars people have to say about all of this? I know that there's controversy. For example, people have tried to do maybe fan fiction or different things, and you can go so far, and if you go too far, the people that own the intellectual property and so forth, say, hey, don't do that. What has been the reaction of the Star Wars people, whether we're talking about the business side or the creative side?
Okay, so there's a lot of Star Wars people. You have the fans, the creators, and the legals, which is the business side of it. So the fans love it, and a lot of the fans are members, obviously. The creators are also fans. That's some of the reason why they're the creators. So they obviously like it too. On the legal side of it, we never put ourselves inside legal boundaries. We never step outside of legal boundaries, and we know exactly what those legal boundaries are. We have had legal discussions with Disney. We know where we stand with it legally, and we know what we can do. So we are working highly efficiently, keeping our legal status very clean and in good standing with Disney's legal team. So we're completely covered there.
It makes a lot of sense. And I should mention, you've got a major book coming out, I believe, in November, and it's called Become the Force, or it's a series of interviews, I guess, or it's based on interviews. And Become the Force, 9 lessons on how to live as a Jediist master. I think and it's going to be put out by Penguin Random House in the U.S. and Watkins in the U.K. So that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah, the book came about. Yeah, you are right. Obviously, that there's a book coming out. It's a major book, and it's based on interviews. But the interviews were because we have a very talented lady who conducted the interviews called Teresa Chung, who's a very famous spiritual author, psychic kind of author. She's very good. She's got a lot of books out, and she's a good friend of mine. And so she conducted the interviews because we felt like it was the best format of getting the information out. Because I obviously have dyslexia and Asperger's syndrome, to sit down and start just aimlessly writing things out, it could have been an issue. It could take a long time. So the interviews kind of really got me engaged with talking. So I kind of did lengthy speeches on the ideologies and idiosyncrasies, and then we translated them into a written book, and it's kind of cool. So it's kind of a bit about my life and how I grew up and how I used Jediism, how I developed it, and then the other part of the book is 50% that and then 50% instructional living as how to live like a Jediist, how to live like a Jediist master, how to use the Force and things like that. And it's a fascinating book, and I'm so proud of it because again, it's a huge accomplishment being out on Penguin Random House distributed in the US, and obviously here in the UK with Watkins Media. I mean, this is just it's crazy how big it's going, and I believe a lot of people have been waiting a long time for something like this to happen. So I think its success bears on the fact that there's a need and a want for it. So everybody's very excited about it. I'm super excited about it, and I'm hoping that everybody who reads it will enjoy it. Well, everyone who's read it so far has enjoyed it. So.
Well, our guest is Daniel M. Jones. He is the founder of the Church of Jediism, and we'll be back right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And please keep listening because I'm going to tell you how you can get your first month for only 99 cents. Now, We all know where to go if we want to see videos or comedy series or drama series for streaming video. There's so many great choices out there. But there's only one great choice for the topics we love on streaming services, and it is Gaia, Gaia. And you can watch Gaia on all of your devices, your Roku, your Apple TV, your iPhone, iPad, Chromecast, Android phone or tablet, Fire TV, your computer. Basically, if you're listening to my voice right now, you can watch Gaia and do it very easily. Now, video about the paranormal, Forteana, the supernatural, there's so much of it on the internet, but well, a lot of it is, well, Mom said if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all, so I won't comment. But that's not the case with Gaia, because everything you see on Gaia, they curate. In many, many cases, they create, and they bring you the best in Forteana topics on video, full stop. It's just a place to go. And if you're not there, you're missing out. Gaia explores these topics, and they're always providing great new content. And every week they send me a spreadsheet, and every week I'm kind of agog at some of the new offerings. This week, for example, they're featuring this Unearthing Nazca. Maybe you saw the viral video about this mummy in Peru, and there's an investigation that Gaia is spearheading. And I think it's great. And what I love about it is they're not coming to it with prejudgment. Actually, scientists are really the ones in control, not Gaia. They're just kind of documenting it. But they're just saying, hey, let the chips fall where they may. But it is fascinating. Unearthing Nazca, that's one thing available on Gaia. And they're going to follow this investigation. And the updates will be available on Gaia. Other things you could see, Wisdom Teachings by David Wilcock, his show, Plasma Energy Transforming the Earth, or maybe you want to check out George Norrie's Beyond Belief. John Greenwald will chime in and be guesting and talking about the U.S. government continuing to deny alien activity on Earth while many files still remain locked away from public view until recalled via FOIA requests, opening the Black Vault. Then Regina Meredith, Open Minds, will be talking to Eldon Taylor. I believe he guested way back on the show. Reclaiming Your Free Will and talking about mass manipulation and the engineering of consent. The engineering of consent. So I think that you'll really love Gaia. And what's really cool is they've set up a page that you can check out just for us. It is at Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim. Watch the videos. That's free. And then to show your appreciation for the sponsorship of this show, and plus you just love this stuff like I do, and you're listening to this, so I know you do, sign up. We'd certainly appreciate it. Again, go to Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening and sign up for the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Daniel M. Jones. He is the founder of the Church of Jediism, and he's telling us all about the church and what it means. Now, here's a question for you. I asked you about the creators of Star Wars. Now, if you think about a movie, some people may say, well, that's just a movie, albeit one of the most successful movies in the history of motion pictures, and extended into a great franchise and merchandising, all this business success, and that it was, just some guys that got together and made this stuff up, and now there's a church on it, a church based on it. But my question is, do you think when Star Wars was created that there was something greater about it, in the sense that they were kind of creating a code of conduct? I mean, do you think the creators in any way had an eye towards all of these different ideals that the church espouses and so forth?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think this is what made Star Wars such an interesting franchise. I think what made the film so encapsulating to an audience is you had this religious philosophy encapsulated in this fantastically futuristic film, which is way ahead of its time. I mean, the story was there, the light and the dark, the political stance of it, the military stance of it, and then you also had this peaceful, loving, kind of esoteric, very Japanesey, down to the roots of spirituality and existence and relatability and relation to yourself and the universe. And I think what George Lucas did and the team who obviously created the storylines and how it all came together is they were very, I think maybe by accident, by trying to create something that was cool and mystical like the Jedi in the movies, they actually stumbled across the research that needed to be done, for the past 1,000 years. And that was pulling out rich sources of information from these ancient religious paths that needed to be re-looked at and realized, because the further we obviously evolved, the more further away from Native American culture and Chi, Chinese culture and Japanese culture of karate and spirituality. And I think these things they dumb us down spiritually and they suppress our psychic abilities, I guess, in a very crude way of saying it. And so what George Lucas did is he did a little bit of the background legwork, if you like, and put it there in a public domain. And people were, wow, this is super cool. And then when you realize that it's just taken from real life, religious philosophies and real life people who have done work in the past, and then you say, well, this could be something very interesting. So yeah, to me, they've done a lot of legwork, and they stumbled across something, maybe by accident, maybe not. Who knows? And Hollywood put it out there, and we've responded. So.
What are some, in Christianity, for example, because that's what I'm most familiar with. I'm of the Christian faith, although I'm not a churchgoer or anything like that at this point of my life. But they're the Ten Commandments. Is there kind of corollary that the Church of Jediism kind of adheres to for the idea of Jediism, commandments, as it were?
I feel that commandments are very totalitarian, and to command would be almost hypocritical of a movement of freedom and peace. So you can't have commands within a peaceful movement. Again, it's a contradiction, and I see that this happens a lot. And I think it happens through translation. I think translation from a lot of older religions to modern day language has caused this this contradiction. So in terms of the Church of Jediism, I believe we do have we have an ethics course that everyone has to take, and it's like an ethics policy. So it's general guidelines don't be rude to other people, always try your best. And so there's a bunch of, it would be here all day going through. It's quite a lengthy document, but you read the document and then you take the ethics test, and then you pass the test, and then you're into your training. So, we do have, ethics that people will follow, but they're not commands. And I'm very strong on not using the words commands, because I don't want to command anybody.
And this is something that's expanding a little bit later in the show. We hope to get Lloyd Auerbach on the line and talk to him in a few moments. This is expanding into America in a significant way. Yeah,
very much so. Our website, becometheforce.com. It's up there now, and we're gaining a lot of members. I think everybody who signed up to the website for the training primarily are Americans, and so we have a information point in the Bay Area out of the IONS unit, which is the Institute of Noetic Sciences. They have a building there called the Earthrise Center, and there are information point at the moment in the US, so people can go there, pick up some literature, and they'll also be stocking the book there physically, and you can probably go there and talk to somebody. We're going to try and staff it with people from the church as well, which is kind of cool. And the book, obviously, Penguin Random House is distributing the book. Barnes & Noble are super excited about the book. Amazon, obviously, it's on Amazon and stuff now for pre-order. So it's getting a big push in the States, and I think it's because the States right now is in a state of limbo. They don't know whether they've had this guy come in as a president, and he's trying to do his best in the people's eyes, and the people wanted to change. They didn't want the old rubbish systems of the elites, but then they realized that he may not be the best guy, and there's all kinds of troubles going on in the US, and there's a big upset at the moment. People are divided and they're misguided, and I think that something like this, a unification of people and spirit and life and love, with the application of peace, I think this is an application that is going to be very useful in the United States, and I believe in the hearts of the people who live there.
Now, in terms of, this is a concern that I think you probably heard, so it'll be nothing new to you. But when people hear church of something, and it's something non-traditional, I think it's fair to say this is non-traditional. It's kind of outside the box. Their mind goes to dark places in terms of cults and those kind of things. Do you ever get any concern about that? And when you do, how do you allay those concerns?
Yeah, I suppose people will see things as a cult. They always will do. Cults use religious indoctrination through creeds and also pseudo-dogmatic conditioning. We offer none of those things. And then a cult obviously will have some sort of control mechanism, because obviously cults are quite scared of exterior input or exterior stimuli. And if you really want to get technical about it, I would say, look at people like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They could be classed as a cult. The Jehovah's Witnesses could be classed as a cult. And I believe in this country, in the Kingdom, they are classed as a cult. So there's a fine line, or there's a clear definition actually. What is a cult? And what is a religious philosophy, or what is a cult and what is a movement of people? And I would find ourselves more on the side of a movement of people. We don't restrict anybody's access. We don't disconnect anybody from family members. We don't practice religious indoctrination or conditioning. There is no mental conditioning or behavioral personality conditioning. So these traits that we do not infringe on our people, our members, would make us nowhere near a cult. And it's kind of sad if people want to kind of relate us to being a cult, but I believe we try and do some good in the world. Like I said, people are free to do what they want. So I would say we are not a cult, 100% not. And people can think what they like, because we're obviously going to do some good, and we are doing good, and it doesn't really matter.
And I have to ask on the flip side, some people see this and say, this is a joke. This is a goof. I mean, from everything I can gather from what you're saying and looking at the website, this is not a joke. This is not a goof. This is not a practical joke. You're very sincere about this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously people are going to see it as a joke because it's quite bizarre. You're relating something to relatability from a movie franchise, but we see it as an extrapolation and a reference point, and not a belief system based on a movie. So you have to remember that. And people are always going to see things as jokes. I mean, people see Scientology as a joke. People see Satanism as a joke. People see the Christian church as a joke. I mean, there's no exception for any religious movement or philosophical movement is exempt from people's ridiculing for being humorous. And, you just take it on the chin. You say, oh, well, you can laugh at it. You can call it a joke. But when you really look at it and you read the book and you get involved, then there may be some good work to be done there. So I say, and that's cool. If we can make people laugh, it doesn't matter what they're doing. At least they're happy. So hey, we're still winning. If they're laughing and they're happy, then that's all I'm really bothered about.
Now, in terms of being a member, do you go to services? Are there gatherings? Do you proselytize? I mean, what is involved in being a member of the Church of Jediism? It's
a good question, and being a member, it's an ever-evolving situation. We're super young. I think we're probably one of the youngest religions on the planet. I think we are the youngest religion on the planet. So and probably one of the fastest growing ones on the planet, I think, as well. And it's super exciting because it's changing. We used to do all our stuff foreign-based, and it was all foreign-based. And then we moved to having local meetings. But then because of my popularity status here for being in the media a lot and being on the TV and stuff, it was impractical to have meetings where a lot of people would go there, but just to kind of want to get a picture with you and talk. So you couldn't really practically do the meetings. So what we're doing now is we're having dedicated events where we will do larger gatherings. So we're going to try and we are planning one for the US in October. We are planning one in the UK for November, and these are going to be regular things, and we're going to try and do them a bit more. So they're going to be, rather than being like weekly meetings where people kind of go and congregate every week and pray and stuff, these are going to be more like events that happen every few months, where a lot of people go there, more like a convention of the church rather than a gathering of religious belief. And another thing is to be a member. Once you sign up online and you start your training, it's kind of like it's kind of like there's a point system, so you can build up points and become like, a master. Or there's different criteria, and and you can do such a lot on a website, which will all be available in November. And it's kind of like you have access to almost like a Netflix database, where you donate a little bit of money every month and you get access to this huge database, and then you can go in there and you can watch videos from different trainers and take different courses, and then you can do, you can build up your information on certain things. Like Lloyd's on there, he's doing classes, and it's super cool. People are so excited about it, and I think for the first time it's a funneling of information to people that they really want. So we're pulling trainers from all over the world of very different experiences and information. And we're putting them all in one place where people are super excited to get that information. Otherwise, they'd have to traipse around the internet and go to different people's websites. Some people may not have a website. And so, yeah, we're making ourselves a one-stop for everything to do with this kind of philosophical movement. And that's what the members do mainly. Primarily, they'll do that. But obviously, everybody's super excited about the cons we're going to be doing and the events. So I would say just watch the space in terms of those events.
Now, I have to ask this because we're on a show called the Paranormal Podcast, and we talk about the supernatural.
Yep.
Now, you talked about the ethics, living life a certain way, not being rude, and all of these different ethics. But do you think most churches or religious movements have the belief that they are tapping into something supernatural? Do you believe the Church of Jediism and what you're doing is tapping into something supernatural?
Absolutely, yeah. So I believe that, okay, so all the major religions in the world, their paths lead to the exact same place, and that's my personal view, and it's not a view that I push over onto the church. Again, there's no commanding in there, but I'm just saying that's why I believe how that exists and that model works. And they are tapping into the supernatural life force, living life energy, and everything in the universe taps into it. I believe that humans have got lost in that process of not being able to tap into the supernatural force and the supernatural energy and the supernatural entities that may exist between vibration and energy, and it's pure consciousness and creativity at its greatest form. And with Jediism, what we're trying to do is get people into a condition where their bodies are and their minds and their spirit, their soul is able to communicate with this energy and really feel that connection, because that's so important, because we've lost it, and it's something that has always been there for humans. We've always been in connection with everything, just like any other species in this universe will always have a connection to that living life force energy.
Well, we're going to have Lloyd on in a bit to talk about what he's doing over here in the U.S., but in general, how can people connect to the Church of Jediism and learn more about becoming the Force?
Sure. Okay. So if people are interested in what we're doing, you should totally check out the churchofjediism.org, or you can go to becometheforce.com and check out everything we've got online. You can sign up for our mailing list and you get the newsletter of what we're doing in the community. But my advice would be, if you pre-order the book from Barnes & Noble, Become the Force, it's everything in there. It's got the history of the church, the practices of the church, everything you could think of, even a bit about my life. So I think that would be the best way. If somebody wanted like a basic understanding of what we're doing or an intermediate understanding of what we're doing, the book is the place to go.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us today. The founder of the Church of Jediism, Daniel M. Jones. We're glad to have him with us today. And I know you've heard this more than once. May the Force be with you.
Thanks, Jim, and also with you.
Well, that was certainly an enlightening and interesting session with Daniel Jones. Now, we wanted to get Daniel and Lloyd Auerbach online at the same time. Lloyd, of course, is working with the Church of Jediism in the States. Unfortunately, schedules wouldn't allow that, but we were able to dial into Lloyd and get his perspective, and here it is. Now, we had a chance to visit with Daniel Jones. You just heard the interview on the Church of Jediism, and one of our favorite people when we talk about the Fortean and the metaphysical and these kind of things is Lloyd Auerbach. And that's how I found out about this whole Church of Jediism to begin with. And it turns out that, as I mentioned in the interview earlier, he is involved. He is a Jedist master, and he is also an advisor for the Church of Jediism in the United States. And he's I believe we're going to be doing some things with the church here in the States. So we wanted to bring him in for a few minutes and get his take on it. Lloyd, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much.
So, first of all, how did you get involved in this?
Well, I was interviewed by one of the folks who's working with Daniel, Teresa Chung, who is an author over in the UK. She interviewed me for her Facebook page, and when she found out I was heavily into Star Wars, she told me a little bit about what Daniel had been doing and what they were planning to do, and invited me to be the person submitting or putting together a class on kind of the Jedist superpowers, so essentially on psychic development, which is what I ended up doing. And working with Julia Mossbridge, who is connected to the Institute of Noetic Sciences. She's actually the one who recommended me first to Teresa, as well as a couple other people here in the Bay Area. We had our little group of folks involved in the faculty, you might say, for the Church of Jediism, and really are kind of laying out a plan for the kinds of courses that Daniel had in mind and working with Teresa, and to bring people a lot of, I guess you could say, the way of the Jedi, even though we're not using that word in what we're promoting right now.
So, in terms of the church itself, people hear that word church, and I talked to Daniel about this. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to throw away my current religion if I have one, or maybe I'm an atheist and I don't want to go to any kind of church. Right. So you get it kind of on both sides. What are your thoughts about why is it a church? How does that relate to it? And should people should that not scare people off?
Well, it shouldn't scare people off, and actually several of us had a discussion with Daniel about that because, for example, my upbringing is Jewish, and I've been calling myself a Jedi for a long time because that's kind of more in line with my thinking and belief patterns, but there's this religious connotation to church, of course, that doesn't jive with my background or that of a few of the other folks. But Daniel actually started, he explained a couple things. First of all, he had been using church as a term, and I'm sure he mentioned this, that relates to a group of people of similar beliefs, kind of like-minded people, rather than an actual religious site. And the other thing here is he kind of branded it back in the, 10 years ago, and it's kind of tough to change your brand without a huge amount of marketing. He didn't want to lose what people knew about what he'd been doing before as he relaunched this site, and I can certainly appreciate that in general. This is an online thing. It's not, it's not like there are going to be physical structures or churches in that sense. This is really a spiritual path. It's a different thing, and as the mission of Jediism kind of puts out there, as his book puts out, will be putting out there, religion, whatever your beliefs are, they can work with belief in the Force or the way that kind of the spiritual path that's being laid out here. It's not a religious thing per se, and in fact, I'd say that it's more of a philosophy, and it's that spiritual way. It's a philosophy, kind of like Taoism is.
And he did make that point that he said it could be, I think the word he used was a bolt-on, or it can complement if you are part of a religious tradition, or if you're not part of one at all and don't really want to be. Now, what are the things that attracted you to it? What concepts do you think just have universal truth, even though some people might say, well, this is a movie after all, a great movie, a great series of movies, but it's a movie. But what are the kind of truths that have come out of Star Wars and been encapsulated in the Church of Jediism that have attracted you to it?
Well, first of all, yes, the Star Wars films are films. They're movies. There's an entire expanded universe with all the books and comics and TV shows and everything else. But at the heart of it is what George Lucas did when he created the idea of the Jedi and the Sith, which he took. It's not like this was created out of his head. This was not made up. It was based on Eastern religions, Eastern philosophies, physics, mythology. I mean, we all know that he was a follower of Joseph Campbell. So a lot of this has to do with human general beliefs and looking at kind of as a broader spectrum, the idea that there is something out there that we tap into, not necessarily intelligent. That's up for you to believe that in whatever way you want, whether you believe in God or gods. But there's some energy, there is some life force to the universe, there's some consciousness. Physicists talks around the word consciousness as being the heart of everything, although they're not talking about human consciousness there. There's something that, as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, binds living things together. So it binds the universe. So that concept struck a real chord for me when I saw Star Wars the first time. And I have to kind of say that the Force was with me back then because I actually won tickets, the only thing I've ever won, in a radio contest. So I saw a preview 3 days before it opened. And then the following day, a buddy of mine, I was in college at the time, his dad worked for the Chicago Sun-Times, and he asked me if I wanted to go see this science fiction movie called Star Wars. He didn't know anything about it. His dad had given him tickets. So I saw it twice, 2 press previews, before it even opened up. So I was really taken aback by the heart of it, the kind of idea that we can tap into things, because it really jives with psychic experience and psychic phenomena in so many different ways. Plus the fact that the idea at the heart here that Daniel is putting out there is that we have to know that we're connected to everybody. You know, parapsychology has been looking at the idea of interconnectedness since the 70s. So that's a term that we've tossed around since the late 70s, that we're all interconnected. That's what Psi does. So it really kind of fits in with my approach to consciousness, human consciousness, and also our connection to the world. And that really is what attracted me to what he was trying to do.
Well, when you said you were involved, it certainly got my attention because I've long said, and even when you're not in earshot, you're one of the real people in this area that I respect what you do in terms of the metaphysical and the Fortean and so forth. And I think you're one of the smartest people in the game. And certainly I said, well, I do want to find out more about this if Lloyd is involved. So if people do want to learn more, now we gave earlier the places that Daniel pointed them, but where would they go if they wanted to become involved in general, or if they want to get involved in specific things here in the United States?
Well, in general, there is the website, which is becometheforce.com or thechurchofjediism.org or even tcoj.org. And you can register there for free and ask for notifications as the courses are going to come up. So we're, at this point, waiting till everybody's courses are done. Mine are done. Mine have been done for a little while, but they decided to hold off until everyone has the courses in. And it's going to run a range of training. I think people are really going to be surprised by what's here, what's actually involved, because it's not, while it references Star Wars, certainly, because it's a great metaphor for all sorts of things, it's just really great material coming on everything from creativity to psychic development. So it's a wide range of things that'll be there. So that's the first thing, is the website. Second would be when the book comes out in early November, and people should pay attention to the launches that are going to happen. The book launches are going to happen. Daniel's book is called Become the Force. And I've got an advanced copy of it, been reading through it, and it's a great, great, great thing. It not only tells his story, but also sets out kind of the precepts of what this path of Jediism really is all about, more so than certainly the website does. I strongly suggest people take a look at the ethics material, the ethics documents that's actually up on the website as well, just to get an idea of what we're talking about in terms of behavior. And it's not, you know, it's not strictly Jedi as in Star Wars. It's really more human and humanistic for things. As far as the United States goes, the website is going to be the main thing for folks. Once the book comes out, or around the time the book comes out, we'll be doing, I know we're doing an event here in the Bay Area at the Institute of Noetic Sciences Retreat Center on November 7th, and we hope to have a whole bunch of other events going on. I know Daniel will be coming to the United States and probably doing some media appearances, and hopefully we'll be doing some other events in different parts of the country. But once this book gets launched and really the courses get going, we hope to be doing more here in the States in terms of events. So we'll have to wait and see what the Force brings us.
There you go. And one last thing. I know you've been extremely busy. You took time out of your busy schedule. Is there anything specifically that you'd like to add, or things you'd like people to know about the Church of Jediism?
Just that as soon as you mention it to people, you get both a smile and a snicker for people. It's kind of interesting. I think that there's an awful lot of people who recognize Star Wars, and we use popular culture to teach, to educate, to talk about topics. So when we talk about the ideas that are inherent in Jediism, whether it's how you treat other people, how you treat yourself, or how you connect psychically, which is a piece of that, it's only a small piece of it, you can reference Star Wars, you can reference this. It is inspired by Star Wars and the Jedi. It is not a bunch of us running around with lightsabers and robes at this point. So it's really more, again, of a spiritual path. It's a way of connecting with everyone. That's the important thing to know.
Well, it's been great talking with you, and I know you can see it coming clear across the country, but may the Force be with you.
Thank you, and remember to become the Force yourself.
Well, something to consider, the Church of Jediism. Who'd have ever thunk it? But I hope you found that segment interesting with both Daniel and Lloyd, and we thank them for their time today. Now we're going to talk to Laird Scranton about the mystery of Skara Brae right after this. You know, when we look for sponsors and people we're going to work with on these shows, I look for things that I would actually use or do actually use, and I think they can bring some value to the audience. So our next sponsor is My Patriot Supply, and I sought them out because over the years, I've become increasingly convinced that it's important to be prepared, not paranoid, but be prepared. Sensible preparation just makes sense. I'll give you an example. In 2003, where I live in the state of Ohio, there was a big blackout. In fact, there was a big blackout in a big chunk of the United States, Northeast blackout of 2003. And many Americans did not have power for some time, for some hours. In my case, it was about 18 hours. I think in all, about 55 million Americans were impacted. Look it up if you don't remember or don't believe me. And that convinced me, wow, what if this happened for a prolonged period of time? What if we didn't have electricity? What would happen? Because it was really eerie. I'll never forget it. Walking out on my front porch, I live in a pretty heavily populated suburban area, and there was nothing but stars. It was totally black. No street lights, no house lights. The only lights you might see are some passing cars, and that was it. And that was a very bizarre thing. Also bizarre was the fact when you turned on your tap water, there was no water. And that was downright scary. Now, luckily, that was only for 18 hours. That was kind of a minor inconvenience. But what if it happened for a longer time? And to these days, I got to tell you, I'm very concerned about North Korea and their possibility of using something like an EMP that would knock out the power grid for weeks, months, maybe years. And if you don't believe me, look it up. It was just featured in one of the big mainstream American papers. Look up North Korean EMPs. I'm not making this up. This is a real thing. So when a listener asked me this last week, they said, Jim, aren't you, it's a little over the top. Should you really be fear-mongering? That's the word they use. I said, well, let me tell you why it's not fear-mongering. And I went on to explain what I just told you. I worry. Things can happen. Scary things that can happen. Those rogue nations like North Korea, cyber terrorists shutting down the banking system, or natural disasters or the spread of a deadly disease like Ebola. And when the unpredictable happens, I think it just makes sense to have a plan in place to survive. You need to ensure you can feed yourself and your family, and that's why I really believe emergency preparedness is so important. And that's where My Patriot Supply delivers. I trust and use them for my family, and you can too. Take advantage of my podcast survival special today. Get their 4-week survival food supply for only $99. That's a fair price for emergency food that, get this, lasts up to 25 years. It's ready for survival when you need it. So call 888-440-7839 or go online to preparewithjim.com. Prepare for the unexpected and make the call while things are still calm. And let's hope they stay that way. But again, be prepared. If nothing else, it's great peace of mind. Because $99 does ensure that peace of mind with a month of survival food. Act now, 888-440-7839 or preparewithjim.com, 888-440-7839 or go to preparewithjim.com. Thanks, My Patriot Supply. And we have one of our favorite guests on the topic of ancient mysteries with us today because not only is he a genius and really knows his stuff, but he's one of the nicest guys out there. Has such interesting information to impart. I'm talking about Laird Scranton, and we're going to talk about his most recent book, The Mystery of Skara Brae. And Laird is an author of a series of books on ancient cosmology and language, including Science of the Dogon, Point of Origin, and China's Cosmological Prehistory. He is presented at conferences throughout the United States and is a frequent guest on Red Ice Radio and Coast to Coast AM, and our little program's here, too. He lives in Albany, New York, and we're so glad to have him with us. Laird, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Jim. First, I have to stop blushing here.
Well, it's audio. Nobody will notice.
It's always fun to talk with you, and a little bit of a challenge, a little bit like trying to land a jet on an aircraft carrier. You've been having your ups and downs.
Yeah, it is. It is. Laird's talking about, we just had a whole a kind of comedy of errors on my side. We had tech issues, and one day I wasn't feeling well, but we did get together, and we're here now, so that's the important thing.
That's great.
Now, Laird, for people who are not familiar, where and what is Skara Brae?
Yeah, when I started out, I had never heard of it. I had a question from a fan about a little village, a Neolithic village from 3200 BC called Skara Brae. It's located in northern Scotland, on an island off the coast of northern Scotland called Orkney Island. And this little cluster of structures represents the first farming village in Scotland. But the people who were there were not only just farming, they were also in their spare time building these huge megalithic structures, a series of them that nobody knows, who the people were or why they did it. It's a big archaeological mystery as to where they came from or how to connect them to the rest of the world.
Now, when we think about ancient mysteries, I think most people automatically go to Egypt and they go to Stonehenge, and they forget a lot of other places and don't look at a lot of other places. Why do you think that is?
These are the what can I say? The sites that have charisma. These are the ones that have been popularized. These are the shiny sites. But Skara Brae actually is an ancestor of, or is considered to be an ancestor of Stonehenge. It's the same tradition, but it's really the starting point of what people see as that tradition, the Henge tradition in the UK. The other sites are actually a lot of times contribute a lot of really interesting information about the sites that are more familiar. I learned a lot about Egyptian pyramids by studying a type of shrine that the Buddhists and the African tribes build, comparable to a Buddhist stupa. And there's symbolism that crosses over. That's what my field of study is. My field of study is comparative cosmology. I look at myths and symbols and words and ritual practices of various cultures and try to understand more about them by comparing how different cultures handled the same issue.
So when we're talking, I just want to make sure I'm explaining it well to the audience and folks understand. When we're talking about cosmology, we're talking about a way of looking at the world that these various societies had. Is that kind of correct?
Yes. When ancient cultures talked about cosmology, they were talking about processes of creation, but they were talking about three processes in parallel. How the universe forms, how matter forms, and how biological reproduction happens. And in the mindset of the cultures that I've studied, they see these as inherently similar processes, so similar that the Dogon use a single progression of symbols to simultaneously describe all three of those processes. So this is part of what makes the symbolism complicated, because when we talk about, well, what does the shape of a hemisphere represent? You can't really ask that question. You really have to ask, what does it represent in terms of one of those particular themes? If we're talking about biological reproduction, a hemisphere represents an expanded womb of a woman, of a mother. If we're talking about the formation of matter, a hemisphere represents the expansion of mass as matter forms. And so there's parallel symbolism, but it's complicated.
Now, the thing that interests me when you look at these ancient cultures is that you have these societies, these groups of people, separated by vast distances at a time where vast distances either weren't or weren't easily traversed. And through time and in space, geographic space, you have very similar ways of looking at the world. And that's what you found at Skara Brae, wasn't it?
It is. Actually, that issue of distance is fairly easily solved when you take a careful look at the material they're talking about. My entry point into all of this was a little African tribe called the Dogon, and they say that their cosmology describes how matter forms, how their tribal god created matter. But it's when you closely examine their drawings and their descriptions, you realize that this is a scientific structure. They're not talking about, elephants standing on the backs of turtles. They're talking about how protons and electrons and neutrons form, how waves turn into particles, how light affects things, how light is connected to time, things like that. These are deep scientific subjects that are being represented. And my outlook is that even though we don't believe that there was anybody at 3200 BC who might have been talking about these subjects, if we can show that they were, then traveling around the planet is probably not their biggest problem. That whoever is able to talk about these scientific subjects accurately at that day was certainly capable of traveling at least regionally.
Now, when we look at some of the places where we see commonalities, I mean, this even goes to Egypt, doesn't it, with Skara Brae?
Yeah, my books have, the progression of my books have sort of been from Western Africa to Egypt to India to Tibet and China, then to Turkey and sort of the Fertile Crescent area, and then on to the UK with this new book. I didn't really expect to find the kinds of connections that I did in the UK as abiding a set of connections as I found. But it's all the same stuff presented in similar ways, oftentimes presented using the same words, the same symbol to represent the same thing, and oftentimes with signatures. For example, most people are familiar with the idea of a cubit as a unit of measure. Mm-hmm. Well, the way that cubit relates to the system, you come to see that it represents one of a whole list of signatures of the tradition, that any culture that used a cubit to measure things was probably influenced by the same tradition. It's like if you got together a group of people from your high school from different class years, and anyone who had a handout from third period math was taught by the same teacher. That's sort of the way these cultures are. They all preserve certain artifacts of the same tradition.
So can you talk to us about some of the high points of Skara Brae, some of the things that kind of, maybe for lack of a better phrase, you found jaw-dropping or particularly fascinating?
Well, I came at the subject without a whole lot of knowledge about it. I have learned over time that when people ask me questions that I should look into what they're asking, because very often it produces something that's important to my studies. So I knew that the era of 3200 BC, which is really before dynastic Egypt appears. Dynastic Egypt doesn't start to be a coherent culture until after about 3000 BC. So this is before that. I know that the African tribe I study, the Dogon, looks to have been Egyptian during that era, during 3200 BC era. And so I thought, well, it's possible that I'll see some commonality between what's at Skara Brae and what the Dogon do, and maybe that would be an entry point into trying to figure out what was going on there. In Egypt, everybody's used to seeing just a wealth of evidence sitting there. There, from pyramids to tombs to painted, or let's say hieroglyphs on walls of carved into stone walls, statues, all sorts of other kinds of evidence in Egypt to try to tie things to papyrus texts. At Skara Brae, we don't have that. We have a very minimal amount of evidence to work from. And so one of the starting points for me ended up being architecture. That in this little village, it turns out that all of the original houses were built to a single plan, and it was an odd plan. It had some features that the researchers in the UK they consider to be unique. One of these is that there's a little round room at the end of each of these little huts that they describe as being beehive cell shaped. The basic structure of the house is it's this round room at one end. There's a large sort of square central room, 2 side rooms that are rectangular that were house beds, and there's an entryway at the bottom that the door to the outside was through. So I realized when I did some more research with the Dogon that the Dogon also sometimes build stone houses. These houses at Skara Brae are built with flat slabs of stone that were stacked without mortar. It's called drywall construction. And so the Dogon also build some houses that way. They live in the desert. They normally build from mud. But when they build a stone house, they build it to the same plan as these Skara Brae houses, which I thought was interesting. But
Absolutely.
better yet, the Dogon assign symbolism to the house plan itself. They say there's cosmological meaning to this house. The house represents the body of a sleeping goddess or a sleeping woman. And the round room represents her head, and the side rooms are her arms. The square central room is her body cavity. At Skara Brae, in the center of that, they have a hearth that represents her heart, and the entryway at the bottom represents her sexual parts. So, realizing that I had commonality in the plan of the house and that the plan had meaning cosmologically, suddenly that meant that now I had justification to start interpreting the things I saw at Skara Brae in terms of Dogon symbolism and Dogon language. And so I started comparing words of it. There's an ancient language in the region of Skara Brae called Faroese language. So I was able to compare words back and forth and discover, guess what? The Faroese word for kitchen also has a relationship to the Faroese word for head. So there's body language symbolism to these rooms, to the names of these rooms, and that support the idea that we have the same cosmology going on. So that was sort of the starting point. Now, on Orkney Island itself, in ancient times, in Neolithic times, there was a Neolithic road that connected a series of megalithic sites. These are the large stones were moved to build standing stones and stone circles and burial chambers and things like that. Well, I realized that the sequence of shapes that are being created by these megalithic sites are a recognizable cosmological sequence. They take the same form and same sequence as how the Dogon represents stages of creation of matter. But on a human scale, on a scale that you could walk through. So if you've ever been to a museum where they had, the biology of the body set up on a scale that you could walk through the chambers of the heart, or you can walk through here. Now we're walking through the lungs. That's kind of an exhibit. That's sort of how I compare these structures on Orkney Island. It's a representation of how processes of creation happen on a human scale. That says to me that it was an instructional site, that it was here to teach people things. So that was really the major revelation that got me into writing the book. That was enough material to realize that there was a whole book here to be written. And then the fleshing out of that, it takes us to some pretty interesting places also. But I was of the opinion that what I was seeing, even though it goes against common sense to think that the Egyptians could have been mounting an expedition to Scotland before dynastic Egypt, my perspective was I was seeing Egyptian and Dogon influences on Scotland. It wasn't until I got into the process that I realized that my perspective was backwards. I thought it was very interesting that when the house plan was implemented at Skara Brae, that they added a hearth in the center where the Dogon don't have one. The Dogon live in the subtropical climate. They don't need a fireplace in their house. But when this hearth was implemented at Skara Brae, they added it just in the place where the heart of the sleeping woman should be. And I thought it was interesting. They kept the symbolism intact. They were coherent with that symbolism. It wasn't until later when I started to sense that I had things backwards that I realized that's not the case at all. The hearth the Skara Brae plan is the original one, and the Dogon just removed the hearth when they moved to a country where they didn't need it. They moved it out into a courtyard. They built the same kind of a hearth. They just don't build it inside their house.
Now, here's a question. I mean, there's different different ways of looking at this. Was this information shared by a transfer between peoples? Was it shared by what these people would refer to as a god? Maybe we refer to it as something like ancient aliens. Or is some of this stuff, and I know this is kind of out there, but some of this information is somehow, and this is assuming a creator, but implanted into humans as an archetype at the way we look at various things. I mean, where do you kind of fall in that? How do you think that, again, these transfers between peoples that are fairly a good ways away in terms of space or time or both, how do you think those transfers occur?
In my field of study, the biggest threat to a person who does research like I do is their own imagination. And because the human brain is arguably wired to see patterns that might or might not be real patterns. I mean, if you look at a cloud, a child will see a horse, not a cloud, or they'll see an animal, not an actual cloud. So it's easy to become entrapped in that idea of chasing something that looks real to you but isn't. And the defense against that is to require interpretations to begin with statements on the part of the cultures themselves. In other words, it can't rest on what I think something means. It's got to rest on what the Dogon or the Buddhists or the Egyptians or somebody flatly says they think it means. Mm-hmm. So I'm fortunate in that I have two matching symbolic systems between the Dogon and the Buddhists, given in two different languages, so it's not likely that one got it from the other. They were both documented very early on, so we know they're both ancient, and there are ways of demonstrating that they're both ancient. And so what the Buddhists flatly say that their most sacred symbols were a gift to humanity from a non-human source. The Dogon go a little bit farther. The Dogons say that not only was it a non-human source, but it was a non-material source originally, although they describe actions that could only be happening in material reality. I mean, they have concern for what the physical effects are going to be on us of being around these non-material teachers. And so in the Dogon mindset, the defense against those potentially bad effects was to sequester a group of 8 Dogon tribespeople at a remote location, instruct those 8 people, and send them back to instruct everybody else. And that way, the exposure is only to the 8 people who were originally taught, not to the entire tribe. So Orkney Island as a site, if we perceive it as being an instructional site, meets that description. It looks to me as if it were a place where people were brought to be instructed. The Skara Brae village itself has 8 living chambers in it, which again agrees with what the Dogon are talking about, groups of 8 being instructed at a time. From that perspective, then, it's not a question of the ancient cultures having had contact with each other to compare ideas or exchange symbols or whatever. The perspective is that groups from each of these cultures were brought to the same location, taught the same stuff by the same set of teachers, and then sent back. And so the reason that stonemasonry is the same, looks like it's the same in South America as it does in Egypt, is because they were both taught by the same teachers. It's not necessarily because the South American had direct contact with Egyptians, although that might have happened also.
Now, on the area there, the site, when you look at the Great Pyramids or Stonehenge, there are these tremendous engineering feats that, some people say they're very relatively explicable ways they may have done it. Other people think the intervention of a third party may have had some bearing on being able to achieve these different kinds of things. Are there what we would consider engineering feats at Skara Brae?
There are. Some of the stone chambers there involved lugging 30-ton sandstone blocks.
I guess so.
up to the highest point on the island to build a structure. So it's hard to say how they did some of these things. There was a recent BBC special on Orkney Island where they were testing out some of the ideas. They as part of the episode, they actually extract one of these rocks, these flat rocks that weighs multiple tons, and then try to move it as a group. And they discovered that the most effective way for them to move the rocks was to slide it on seaweed. They would use seaweed as a lubricant and sort of slide it along. And when they did that, they didn't have much of a problem moving, at least getting the stones to be able to be moved a distance. But it's quite a feat. I mean, some of these stones are really, really impressively heavy.
Now, some people say this, and I think I know what you're going to say. I think it mirrors something you said earlier, but I want your opinion on it. Some people say, well, when we assume that there is some third party involved, some messenger from the sky, be it an alien, be it a god, be it non-human, whatever it is, that we're not giving these ancient peoples enough credit, that they were very ingenious and they were able to do these great engineering feats, whether we can totally figure it out or not, through their own intelligence, and that in some ways we're looking down on them when we feel there's something outside of themselves that's involved. What would be your response to that?
It's essentially the same issue as I was talking about. Yes. Interpretations. That if the interpretation begins with what they say, not what we say, then nobody's looking down on anybody. They're telling us how they understood it to have happened, that we're testing the reasonableness of what they're saying. And it's not us looking down on them, it's them saying, here's how it was. And so culture after culture, when you get to the bottom of things, you don't find the tradition, the memory of the culture being that, Uncle so-and-so 5 generations back figured out how to move these heavy stones. In every case, when you get down to the bottom of it, what they're saying is that in ancient times, somebody who was more capable than we were taught us how to do this.
Do you have hope through the book and just talking about this that perhaps Scarabray will get more, I guess for lack of a better word, credit or get more attention?
It already has started to. I'm surprised myself to have been at sort of the cutting edge of this, but Scarabray is suddenly being recognized as a place of significance. There was a book called Uriel's Machine written back in the, I think in the 1970s. Robert Lomas and Christopher Knight wrote a book where they said, by the way, the stonework that we're seeing on Orkney Island looks an awful lot like some of the stonework we're seeing in Egypt. Their theory was that skills of masonry were transmitted across Europe and eventually settled in Egypt, which is a slightly different perspective than what I have on it. But I'm not the first person to have noticed that there are interesting things going on there. The Orkney Island area and the Faroe Island area, which is next to it, are regions that for some reason or other have sort of escaped scrutiny by people in the mysteries field.
Oh, that's great. That's great when you can bring something to the attention of a whole field. That's quite a feather in your cap.
Well, again, it wasn't even my fault. All I was doing was faithfully pursuing a question somebody had asked me. So,
but you pursued it, and that's the difference. Now, do you think that there are other sites like this out there that may still be under the radar that could add to this field of work and this look of shared cosmology?
I think that every culture that shares elements of these archetypical symbols, these are the archetypes that Jung identified, is going to have something to contribute. They're going to have a perspective. It's like my wife Risa says that when we go to reunions, high school and college reunions, that the people you see there carry memories of you that you might not even have of yourself. And that's sort of the way that it works with these cosmologies, that each culture retains a piece of this that the others forgot about. And so there's always benefit. Anytime I find a new culture that looks like it's connected, there's always a benefit in digging into it to find out how did they see things. There are elements that I consider to be loose ends in one culture that get tied up by another. The Dogon make references to a mulberry tree, but they don't explain it very well. But when you go to ancient China, suddenly it's a central myth about mulberry trees. The Chinese have what's considered to be a theoretical plan for agriculture that when you go to the Dogon was actually implemented. It's the actual basis of their agricultural system. And so these comparisons back and forth, that's the whole purpose of doing the comparisons, is that one culture is able to flesh out what the other culture doesn't say.
Very interesting. So the important question here, I think, is where can we find the book and more information on this?
Well, the book is available at all the usual outlets. The publisher is Inner Traditions, and so the obvious place to go is innertraditions.com. And they are also affiliated with Simon & Schuster, so there's an author page for me on simonandschuster.com. But you can find the books pretty much anywhere. If you walk into a Barnes & Noble, you're liable to find some of the books on the bookshelf there in stock. But the books can be ordered through Amazon or through any bookstore. They're pretty available.
Well, it's been a great discussion. Our guest has been Laird Scranton, and we talked about the mystery of Scarab Ray, Neolithic Scotland, and the origins of ancient Egypt. Laird, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jim.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I did. What a varied and different show, and I think it was a good one, and I hope you'll continue to listen. Please go to jimharold.com/subscribe. That's jimharold.com/subscribe to make sure you're subscribed to my podcasts. That way you never miss a free podcast, and those are for the free podcasts. So jimharold.com/subscribe. Plus, please tell your friends. We would appreciate it oh so much. We'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and jimharold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to jimharold.com, and thanks for listening.